A couple of years ago, I made a tool-assisted speedrun of the Game Boy Advance game Tactics Ogre, the Knights of Lodis. I have a soft spot for this genre, and I'd played a lot of the usual suspects, but this game had somehow slipped under my radar. When I saw how broken it was, however, I was sold. There's a fundamental bug in this game that can lead to several glitchy outcomes. It hinges on having a unit die in battle and then sorting your roster of characters. When you execute the sort, one or more of the following strange events takes place. Characters in your roster can get inexplicably deleted, other characters and their items might get mysteriously duplicated, character graphics can get messed up, and most important of all, you can create outrageously overpowered, glitched characters. Back when I made the run, I wanted to create as many of these broken, overpowered characters as I could, but I didn't really understand the specifics of the bugs. I mostly relied on brute force experimentation because all sorts of strange outcomes would happen depending on how I set things up, and many of those outcomes caused the game to break so badly that it wasn't possible to complete it, which caused a lot of frustration. But now I've revisited the game and taken a deeper look at its code, and the puzzle is solved. In this video, I'll first explain the main underlying problem, then I'll show how that problem cascades forward into all the other glitches. I'll try to keep the explanations free of technical jargon, but I'll refer to code when it's helpful. In most games, losing a unit in a battle is undesirable, but in the Knights of Lodis, if you really want to see crazy things happen, someone's got to kick the bucket. Don't feel too bad for this Sacrificial Lamb though, their death is about to start a chain reaction of glitchy goodness. How? Well, let's first take a look at how the game represents the roster of units. There's an area in memory where every unit you own is stored. You can think of it as a hotel with 32 rooms. Each room can be empty, or it can have a unit in it. When a unit dies in battle, the game kicks that unit out of its hotel room, leaving their room empty. But here's the thing. There's another separate roster. Let's call this area in memory the visual roster. The visual roster gets rebuilt whenever the game needs to show the units. When you open the menu, and again right after a sort. You can think of it as a record of which hotel rooms are currently occupied. So, for example, if hotel rooms 1, 2, and 3 are occupied, and the remaining 29 are empty, then this visual roster contains 1, 2, 3, and then 29 empty spots. Maybe you can already spot the problem that's about to arise. Suppose the unit that died was in hotel room 2. Before the unit's death, the hotel had rooms 1, 2, and 3 occupied, while the remaining 29 were empty. The visual roster matched 1, 2, 3, and then 29 empty spots. But after the unit's death, hotel room 1 is occupied, room 2 is now empty, room 3 is occupied, and the remaining 29 rooms are empty. When the visual roster gets rebuilt, it will now contain 1, 3, and then 30 empty spots. There's a mismatch in the alignment of these two rosters anytime a unit dies. This in itself isn't technically a bug, but it is the catalyst for what's about to happen next. Okay, one of our units has died in battle, and now we open the menu and press the sort button. This is the moment everything goes wrong. The game has 5 different properties that it uses to sort units, and it runs through all 5 every time the units are sorted. Sorting the units means that the game needs to rearrange which hotel rooms the units are in. But how does the game figure out which room each unit should move to? Let's take a closer look. When you press sort, the game creates a third area in memory that it uses to do all its sorting calculations. You can think of it as the hotel's guest book. Each entry in the guest book doubles as a destination room in the hotel, starting at 1 and going up by 1 to the number of living units. The guest book records information about the current rooms units are in, unit sort rankings, and which rooms to fetch units from. Basically, the game uses the guest book to help move units from the room they were in to their newly sorted destination room. So far, this all seems quite sensible, but as we examine how the sorting process works, you'll see that things quickly spiral out of control. The sorting process consists of 4 separate phases. The first phase we've already covered. The game creates the guest book, 1 entry for each living unit. In the second phase, the game calculates unit rankings for one of the sort properties. In the third phase, the game attempts to map or order those rankings back on to their appropriate room destinations. One of the things the game needs to check during the second and third phases is whether a room is locked, because units in locked rooms should not be sorted into different rooms, they should stay where they are. To check if a room is locked, the game consults a lock checker, and that checker doesn't take room numbers, it takes a visual roster position, and translates it through the visual roster to find the room to examine. But the number the game hands it is different across the second and third phases. During Phase 2, the game checks using the guestbook's entry position, entry number 1, and then entry number 2. And because guestbook entries and visual roster positions line up perfectly, both are just the ordered list of occupied hotel rooms, the correct rooms get checked. But during Phase 3, the game instead uses the current room number that's written in the guestbook entries. 1, then 3. Those are hotel room numbers, but the lock check treats whatever it's given as the position to consult in the visual roster, and position 3 of the visual roster is empty. This is the critical moment. The game uses the number 255 to represent an empty spot, but that giant number is much bigger than the maximum hotel room number of 32. There's no check that the number is too big, however, so the game forges ahead and tries to determine whether hotel room 255 is locked. It ends up looking way beyond the normal area of memory in a place that has nothing to do with units at all. Later, we'll see that this broken hotel room lookup is how we trick the game into creating overpowered glitch characters. But for now, the result is that the lock check grabs a piece of bad data and interprets it as a unit in the roster being locked in their room, even if they are not. One consequence of this mix-up is that the unit gets excluded from any of the game's attempts to map its rankings to new rooms. There's now a mismatch between the number of destination rooms looking for rankings and the number of units that can supply those rankings. This mismatch means that one of the guestbook's room the unit is coming from entries gets labelled with that same broken number, which the game will later interpret as an empty hotel room. Which room gets this label exactly? Well, the game maps the unit rankings onto rooms starting at room 1 onward, so this broken number will land on whatever room is next after that mapping process is complete. But we're not done yet. The second and third phases of the sorting process repeat 5 times, once per sort property, and because a guestbook entry was left with a broken number, subsequent rounds of these phases cause additional broken ranking lookups, excluding more units with each cycle from the game's attempts to map rankings to rooms. The guestbook is poisoned, and how much that poison spreads depends on how many units are unlocked. Once all 5 sort cycles are complete, the process enters its 4th and final phase. Here, the game makes a temporary copy of the entire hotel. It then goes through each entry in the guestbook to copy the sorted roster back into the original hotel from this copy. Unfortunately, some of the guestbook entries now have broken numbers in them, and barring some nuances that we'll dig into, this is the fundamental problem that leads to all of the glitches. One of the flow-on effects from the sort bug is that one or more units in the roster can disappear into thin air. They're not just failing to show up visually, they have been kicked out of their hotel rooms like the unit that died in battle. But we're not in a battle, so why does this bug happen? Remember that in the third phase of the sorting process, a destination room ends up asking for a ranking that no available unit can supply. When that happens, the guestbook's field that's supposed to say, "Fetch this room's new occupant from that room," never gets filled in. It's left holding the broken number, 255 again, which is far too big to be a real room. And it gets worse across the 5 sorting cycles. A unit whose entry was left blank is carried into the next cycle with that broken number as its current room. That disqualifies it from matching, so each cycle tends to leave even more entries blank. By the time all 5 cycles finish, one or more guestbook entries are still saying, "Fetch this room's new occupant from room 255. There's no check anywhere that this is nonsense, so the game forges ahead into the final phase. It creates a temporary copy of the hotel in memory. Then, it goes through each guestbook entry and says, For this entry number, grab all the information about the unit from the source room of the temporary hotel and copy it to the destination room in the real hotel. If the room number was within a sensible range, then it would do exactly what you'd expect. Grab a unit from the temporary hotel and copy it to the real hotel. But the broken number 255 causes it to look way beyond the area in memory where the temporary hotel lives. What does it find in this area? Nothing. Or, more accurately, just a bunch of zeros, because it's memory that the game has never used, so it still holds its starting values of 0. And zeros in a hotel room are interpreted as that room being empty. These zeros get copied into the real hotel's destination room, and the result is that any room whose guestbook entry says "fetch from room 255" becomes unoccupied. A character has effectively been deleted. How do we know which characters will get deleted? Surprisingly, it has nothing to do with which unit died in battle. When the game matches rankings to rooms in Phase 3 of the sort process, each matched unit is placed into the earliest destination that's still available. Any remaining broken numbers of 255 get pushed to whatever unlocked rooms are left over at the end. In the example that you see here, 8 of the 11 units are locked in their rooms, and the last unit gets incorrectly locked by the mangled Phase 3, so the only free destinations are rooms 1 and 2. The broken numbers have nowhere else to land, so the 2 units at the front of the roster, who aren't anywhere near the dead unit, are the ones that get deleted. So far, the sort bug has only made characters vanish. Now for the opposite trick. The sort can also make a character exist twice. And this bug is actually a second, completely independent mistake in the game's code. It doesn't need the broken lock check, or the poisoned guestbook, or any particular arrangement of locked rooms. The duplication happens every single time. All it needs is a dead unit. Think back to the final phase of the sort, where the game copies units from the temporary hotel back into the real one. To do that, the game walks through the guestbook one entry at a time, and each entry corresponds to one destination room. But remember, the guestbook only has one entry per living unit. In our example, 11 units are alive, so there are 11 entries, which means the game only ever writes to rooms 1 through 11. Room 12 is never written to, never checked, and therefore never cleaned out. As far as the final phase is concerned, room 12 doesn't even exist. Meanwhile, the "fetch this room's new occupant from that room" numbers in the guestbook are real hotel room numbers, and those can go higher than 11. Our last living unit is in room 12, because room 11 was emptied when the unit in it died. So one guestbook entry says, "fetch the unit from room 12", and the game happily copies that unit out of the temporary hotel and into an earlier room in the real one. In the example that you see here, it lands in room 11, the dead unit's old room. In effect, the sort is quietly packing the units towards the front of the hotel and closing the gap the dead unit left behind. The problem is that this is a copy, not a move. The unit's data now sits in its new room, and it also sits in its old room, completely untouched, because nothing ever writes to room 12 or sweeps it out. 2 identical copies of the same character in 2 different rooms. And because a unit's hotel room contains everything about them, their equipment gets cloned right along with them. A free copy of a good unit, and their gear, sounds like a gift, but this duplicate isn't as innocent as it looks. Later on, this extra occupant will end up answering questions on behalf of completely different units, with some funky results. We'll get to that soon, but first, a more immediate question. When you clone a unit, what exactly happens to their items? If you've ever played around with this glitch, you may have seen one of its calling cards. Open the inventory after a sort, and the game reports that you now own way more copies of an item. To understand where this number comes from, we need to look at how the game does its inventory management. Alongside the hotel, the game keeps a ledger of the party's belongings. Each item gets one entry in the ledger consisting of 2 numbers, how many copies the party owns in total, and how many of those copies are currently equipped. The available count isn't stored anywhere long term, it's just a subtraction the game does on the fly, copies owned minus copies equipped. Now, how does the game keep the equipped number up to date? You might expect it to carefully add 1 when someone equips an item and subtract 1 when they remove it, and sometimes it does. But whenever units join or leave the roster, it does something else. It throws the old numbers away and recounts from scratch, marching through all 32 hotel rooms, tallying up every piece of equipment worn by every occupant, and then writes the fresh totals into the ledger. On the face of it, this seems like a sensible design. Use the hotel as the source of truth about who's using what. There's just one small problem. The sort button has turned the hotel into a house of lies. Consider the deleted units from earlier, for example. Their equipment was erased along with them. Those items are physically gone from the hotel. As a result, when the recount walks through the rooms, it now finds fewer worn items, so the equipped number drops. But the owned number is never touched. Nothing told the ledger that the items were destroyed. If you own 2 swords, and both are equipped, and one unit wearing a sword gets erased, the ledger now says 2 owned, 1 equipped, 1 available. A brand new sword has appeared in storage, conjured from a dead unit's body. The sort button isn't just duplicating units, it's duplicating items too. The cloned unit does the opposite, which is even more broken. The recount finds their equipment twice, once in each of their 2 rooms, so the equipped number goes up, while the owned number stays the same. And here's where the drama starts. If every owned copy of an item was already equipped, then the ledger now says something like 3 owned, 4 equipped. So the available copies are 3 minus 4 equals... The ledger doesn't know how to deal with negative numbers. If you've seen my video explaining the glitches in Super Pitfall, then what's about to happen will already be familiar to you. Like an odometer rolling backwards past 0, the number underflows. It wraps around to the top of its range, which is, surprise surprise, 255. There's that number again. The result is that the game has been tricked into thinking there are far more copies of items available than there really are. Let's take a little breather from all this talk about characters and items being cloned and erased to go over a bug that doesn't destroy anything. This one just makes the roster look strange. Every entry on the roster screen shows a little picture of the unit standing in it. To draw those pictures, the game keeps yet another list. Think of it as a photo board in the hotel lobby. The important detail is how the photos get pinned up, not by room number, but by visual roster position. First unit on the roster screen, first photo. Second unit, second photo. When the screen is built, the game walks down the visual roster and pins up 1 photo per occupant, in order. That still works after somebody dies. The dead unit's room sits empty, the visual roster ignores that room, and the board gets built to match it as it stands, which is why, right up until we press sort, every picture on the screen is correct. Then we press sort. In the final phase, along with copying units back into their rooms, the game repins the photo board, and it does that using the same room numbers it just used for the units. The photo of the unit fetched from a room gets pinned to the photo board slot for the room that they were moved into. That's a reasonable thing to do. Every unit's picture matches their new room. And since the sort packs everybody towards the front of the hotel, hotel rooms and visual roster positions should end up agreeing with each other again. Should, but don't. The sort's other bug has just emptied a couple of rooms, the 2 units it deleted. The hotel has holes in it again. The visual roster closes over those holes, and now its entries are out of sync again with the hotel room numbers, this time by exactly the number of rooms the sort emptied. The photo board is filed by room number. The screen reads it by visual roster position. 2 deletions, so every photo is now displayed 2 cells away from the unit it belongs to. So what goes in the 2 cells at the front, the ones with no photo 2 places above them? Those photo board slots belong to the 2 rooms that were just deleted, and their entries were filled in using, of course, the blank marker 255. To repin the photo board, the game first takes a small copy of it, 32 entries long, and then asks that copy for entry number 255. That's way beyond the end of the copy, so the game reads whatever happens to be lying around in that part of memory. Both broken slots ask the exact same question, so they get the same data, and therefore the same picture. In the footage I'm showing here, that data happened to be a number that points to a real photo on the board, the female soldiers, which is why the roster suddenly looks like there are 3 of them. The good news is that it's all purely cosmetic. The unit's actual data, stats, items, names, remain untouched. The game is just pinning the wrong photos on the lobby board, But it hints at something important. The game is perfectly happy to mix up data about units and data about what's drawn on screen without ever noticing. So far, that mix-up has only meant drawing the wrong pictures for real units, but we're about to see that this same confusion runs in the opposite direction too. The game can read a patch of screen graphics as if it were a unit, and will build a character out of pixels. Everything we've covered so far, the deletions, the clones, the phantom items, the wrong pictures, is really just collateral damage. Now we get to the main event, the reason a player would deliberately kill off their own unit in the first place. Earlier, I said that the game's broken attempt to look up Hotel Room 255 would eventually let us create outrageously overpowered characters. Let's now look at how that happens. First, what is it that lives 255 rooms past the front door of the hotel? The answer is nothing all that interesting. The game uses this stretch of memory for something completely unrelated to the roster. It's a sketch pad for the screen. The screen is built out of little 8x8 pixel tiles, and the game keeps a plan of these tiles in the sketch pad. Essentially a big grid of numbers saying, this tile goes here, painted in these colours. The plan gets copied to the screen whenever the tiles are redrawn, and room 255 lands in the middle of it. Specifically on a strip of the plan covering 2 rows of tiles near the bottom of the roster screen. So when the game reads the unit in room 255, what it actually reads is that strip of the screen plan reinterpreted as a unit. Numbers that mean things like draw tile numbers 215 and 186 suddenly mean things like the unit's hit points and strength. And because these tile numbers are essentially arbitrary, the stats often come out huge and nonsensical. The unit's name gets the same treatment. A bunch of tile numbers get interpreted as letters, producing a garbled string of characters. In the example you see here, the game happily presents a unit named with 420 hit points. This is a unit made from pixels, a slice of the screen itself. Here's how we find these overpowered glitch characters. When the sort bug deletes units, the visual roster has fewer entries than before. But the roster menu's cursor doesn't know that. It can end up sitting on a position that no longer exists. When the game looks up that position in the visual roster, it finds, what do you know, the blank marker 255, and so it displays the unit living in room 255. That's a glitched character stuck inside the cursor. But now we encounter a problem, because that's all they are, a glitch behind a cursor. This character was never actually checked into the hotel. They exist only while the cursor hovers over them, and the moment you move the cursor, they're gone. You can't find them again either, because the game checks for a valid spot whenever the cursor gets moved. So, how do you keep a character who evaporates the instant you look away? The trick is to use the one feature that moves a unit without letting go of them, the roster's manual swap. Grab the ephemeral unit right where it stands, swap it with a real unit, and the game does what it always does on a swap. It moves all of the information about the 2 units into each other's rooms. That works out great for the glitched unit, but not so great for the locked unit they're being swapped with. The swap moves the real unit's data onto the tile sketchpad, but that sketchpad gets updated again almost immediately, so the real unit disappears forever. So there you have it. Everything we've covered ultimately boils down to one dead soldier causing 2 lists, the hotel and the visual roster, to fall out of step with one another. Every system that trusts those lists pays for it in its own way, whether that's the sorting, the bookkeeping, the pictures, or the locks. The whole family of bugs falls out of this one simple mismatch. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.